Have we got one viewer? 3. Unbelievable. 3. Well, guys, that's amazing. You are witnessing history, i.e. the exact same setup. Oh, no, we put up that new Foo Fighters post, so that one's just for you, Bruce. We assume that you're a fan of Sonic Highways.
Of course. Yes, I've been following them closely. Who they are.
Do you know who Foo Fighters are?
Yes,
surely.
Fighters,
they have to, yeah.
Yes. I've caught up with that just this past week.
Right, okay. Well, we are not fans. It's just we have ironic shrines to things in this house because, as you can see, this is the worst studio imaginable. This is an apartment designed for people that go to UNSW and study geology, you know? And that's like the place we stay. But anyway, I just got to say, just to let you in on this, Bruce, you are kind of saying making history is way too much of a sizzle, but this is a new podcast where we're just interviewing experts like yourself on things and seeing where that flies. I wanted to first off interview people that knew anything about the Byzantine Empire, but they don't want to speak to me.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But you do.
Yeah,
so
I was available, and so
yes.
here it is.
And just to let everyone know, I'm a big fan of Bruce's work. I've never actually met you before. Honestly, the first time I've ever seen you face to face was just before then. But we're more or less pen pals. And you dress like a Texan farmer, but are a hippie. It's essentially like if I summed you up.
A strange mixture could be an apt description. Yes,
yeah.
I've had a very fortunate life so far to mix in a lot of different circles. So that's I guess a lucky part of my background.
And what does that lead you to? Like, you don't do traditional farming. You do some kind of like Alan Savory kind of stuff, don't you?
Yes, I guess I've been lucky enough to rest on the shoulders of many giants, knowledge-wise, and I firmly believe in life that when the student's ready, the master appears, and that's our journey. And if you keep on looking, then it's amazing how many masters you do find along the way. And yes, we've diverged from the regular quite a long time ago, and it's been an enjoyable journey. It has its ups and downs.
Well, what would you describe what you do is as?
Right, yeah. Now that's almost complicated, really. I'm fortunate enough now that I only spend half my time or less on my own property, and I go around Australia advising and doing research and development in the innovative farming systems that I've been involved in. So that's from the wide open stretches of the pastoral lands of millions of acres to close in on the coastal areas of only a few acres on people's places. But
wow.
Yeah.
So you're responsible.
I'm going to do that too.
If I could give you a snapshot of what you do, I'm sure I'm more of an expert on that. I assume that you go to sort of like degraded agricultural land and then bring it up to speed.
Yes, but that's part of the journey. But I would suggest that my main job is to interact with people and assist them on their journey. And I know that might sound a little bit fluffy there, but
yes,
that's but we can only in a way operate from that point of view, because wherever people are, that's where they are, I should say. And so in order that we can attack anything on a regional, national or global scale, it always still has to come from the individual. So if we're not actually addressing what that person and family needs from a basic sort of standpoint, from their standpoint, I might suggest, well, then all we're doing is imposing over the top, and they're only going to be resistant, and we won't get the progress that we all collectively need.
Yes. Okay. Well, where did you think you needed your services then? Like, where did you start when you were doing, say, traditional farming, and where are you now?
Right. Well, a couple of turning points from my younger life, way back in 1984, the deep dark
Far
depths that far
Wonky days.
ago. I went on a 1-year Rotary Youth Exchange to the US and happened to land up in a farming area pretty similar to here in its size and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Interestingly, they had lots and lots of factors that here in Australia we'd say, oh, we wish we only had reliable seasons or great soils or government support or lots of research and development. Well, landed in that spot over there with all of those factors existing, but yet their farmers were going broke at a much faster rate than we were here. And that was still the case, that it was still very, very tough times in the mid to late 80s here. And that always stuck with me. It's not the resources at hand, it's the structures and attitudes that you have to your circumstances that really establish what the outcome is, essentially. So that was a turning point. I'd always had a love and desire of nature in general. And so my working career has been to initiate and innovate for systems that expand the diversity and mass of living organisms, really. And I know that's sounding a bit broad again, but agriculture for 10 to 15,000 years has been actually about simplifying around the planet. And that's been effective in that it's fed a lot of us, billions. But we can't keep playing that game if we don't have fresh fields to go to. And essentially, globally, we've occupied the whole joint.
Am I right in assuming this? The game that we're currently playing adds to desertification. Is that the deal?
Correct.
So it just kind of just makes the soil that was once rich poor.
Indeed, and
yes, I am a farmer.
Well done.
You are listening to Digital Land Chat on Twitch. Yep.
And not only soil, everything. Essentially, the agricultural game has been about simplifying and trying to maximise the singular or only a few products that you want to produce off that area, and one way or another eliminating the competition to that. And that is effective. It does work. But the trouble is, it's the scale we're doing it at. So if I take you just for a brief examination of slash and burn agriculture in the Amazon, it's been practiced for millennia by people at small scale within that whole ecosystem. At that small scale, it actually adds to diversity of the whole rainforest. It actually rejuvenates. But of course, when you go and clear and slash and burn huge areas, then it starts a degradation process. So same tool, but just widely applied, leads to a simplification that you can't undo. And we're probably witnessing at the moment in the Amazon, but also we witness on this continent as well. We're shifting things that are going to be harder to get back to the complexity that they had before. Sometimes it's not so easy.
What would you say are the main practices that you've done on your farm then, and what has that resulted in? Like you would have measurements of what has changed on your farm, surely.
Yes, and I'm a little bit of a one who measures closely until a trend is obvious, and then go with that. And further measuring from there is just indulgence, really. All
right.
Well, it's good to measure everything, and it's great. Base science is always great, but we don't rely on that all the time to do so many things in life. You're not constantly measuring when you're driving down the road. You know the general rules and how it works, and you're adjusting constantly to get that. Farming is like that, large and small. It's paddling in a stream that's forever changing. Yeah. And so you're doing that. So to answer your sort of broader question, a couple of larger innovations that I've, if you like, pioneered, and once again, off the back of lots and lots of base science or great practice in the past. So the two main things I've done in my lifetime is the advent of no-kill cropping, which is instead of simplifying grasslands to grow crops, you actually use that complexity to assist you to grow crops. So it's, if you like...
Well, how does that look?
Messy. Absolutely, yes. And it's one of the reasons why it's hard for folks to take it up and why
Get
it
their
isn't
head
as
around.
widespread. Yes, that's right, because we as humans do like things neat.
Nice and yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
It is a nice site, I got to say.
Absolutely. And this is
Not as nice as a forest, but it does the job. Yeah,
True. And it's cross-cultural. That was established quite some time ago by a mob called Land and Water Australia when they existed, and they did an extensive study across genders, age groups, cultural backgrounds, and that sort of thing. It was Australian. So they were surveying, but it's essentially that we as humans like a park-like surrounds. You know, if we're picking out of pictures, we love the park-like big trees, mown grass underneath, that style of things. The more biologically complex, messy in the Australian, you think about what you see in a national park and how it's all overgrown, messy and everything. That's actually less desirable from a human point of view, but from a biological point of view, that's exactly where we need to head.
Right, so, yeah. You would have to get your head around that. I can't imagine being an ape man and being freaked out looking in, what isn't just straight up savannah. That would freak me out.
Exactly, yes, that's right. And there's another push from agriculturalists and from our society as well, from the heart, if you like. And you can prove this going down to the Sydney Easter Show or any other local show. If you go along there and we're in a pumpkin competition, if you bring yours in on a forklift and I've only got a few little warty looking ones and that sort of thing, I might have made a profit and you've made a huge loss producing your big pumpkin, but you'll get the prize, thanks very much, and you'll be telling me about that at the pub for the next year or so and how hopeless I was, of course.
So actually, I guess it's not even saying that it's messy. It kind of reminds me of when you walk into a bureaucrat's office and it's just papers everywhere and then they say, I have a system. You seem to be the agricultural equivalent of that. And but the results you are getting from your system are better than your neighbours. Well,
yeah, and maybe even I'd backtrack slightly and say different, because
different.
Yes, and being even-handed here, we still as a species are going to have a need for intensity, because if you didn't believe that at all, well then we'd better get rid of all the cities and just spread everybody evenly everywhere. And of course that's not going to happen or needs to happen. So we have needs for intensity. If you're growing a backyard veggie patch and you've got the old quarter-acre block situation, you'll have a huge amount of intensity on your backyard veggies or so on, and that's fine. But if we transpose that out into large scale, then that's incredibly degrading on the broad. Mm. It's incredibly creative and wonderful for humans to do that in their own backyards where they can, and if they choose to. But broadening out that scale is our problem. So same tool. But
so when people look at your farm, do they say that's ugly?
Oh, I'm sure that would be, yes. If we had a straw poll, yes, of most, yes. I'll claim a small percentage that say, yes, I get this, and this is delivering different results than the other way. So instead of getting away from bad or good,
What's different then mean to you? What are the different results?
Oh, right, okay. So that, if you like, my aim in life is to keep on working on systems that consume less, produce more, are stable and support societies. So, and when I say that last bit, that's rural societies, because it's no use if we end up with food production systems which are just concentrated by scale and run by robots, and everybody lives in the city, because we have no connection to the land. And then if we have no connection to the land, it is unimportant, and so the biodiversity in that is unimportant. And we are travelling down, if you like, collectively down that track, that there's no way we can address the broader global things like climate change and that sort of thing without having the intertwined problem of our biodiversity loss, our great species extinction event that we collectively are engineering.
Yeah, but hang on, does that mean that your land is less productive than the other land of just spraying pesticides all over it and growing that one crop on it.
Not in total, no. It is, in fact, actually produces more biomass and more species in total, but a large lot of that isn't economic, of course.
Okay, right, yes, yeah, obviously, right. But the thing is that their land, 20 years from now won't be productive, while yours still will be. Is that the deal?
It will require a greater deal of external inputs to be as productive as...
I never paid attention in political economy at class. What does more output mean?
Oh, right, okay. Growing more grain or livestock, depending on... Or vegetables, if you were, or whatever.
Yeah.
Yes, more stuff, more consumable stuff that you make $1. You know, anybody that's operating it out there, one way or another, it is still part of an economic system, and that's what has to be. And we'll take that as an acceptance that's the case. But of course, we can't have an endless rise in productivity anyway. There are limits to that. Anyway, only that old saying about the only ones who believe in endless growth are economists and madmen.
Yes.
And,
You are not.
Well, hopefully
But
not. But others might judge differently.
Yeah, they would think so, wouldn't they? In your environment, you'd be a weirdo.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yes, absolutely. Even my family probably say that, Jordan.
Yeah,
so that's
but
fine.
if you actually look at it from your perspective, what you're saying is, no, I have figured out the actual productive level of my land. So without like just constantly adding things onto it that is actually detracting from somewhere else, my land is actually sustainable.
Yes, there's the law of diminishing returns. There's only so much off any seasonal area or land area. You know, not all soils are the same, so they can't all produce the same. Not all regions are the same rainfall or temperature-wise and that sort of thing, so they're going to produce different things. You know, it's no coincidence we get our cherries from select areas in Australia and we get our mangoes from some other spot, and so you know I'm fond of both. So you know there's often a great trend about you got to eat local, and largely I'm in support of that. But I'd still like some cherries and mangoes, please, and I'm not going to be growing them in my area. And you know we can swap other things for that.
Well, because I know that we're getting to insane levels when you're talking about that. Like I just remember that. I don't know, in the Middle Ages, for example, I think one farmer could support maybe 5 or 10 people, and now we're at the stage where one farmer can support 200.
Yeah, in Western systems, but if we take a global look, 85% of the world's food is produced from farms that are 5 acres or less.
Really?
Yes, that's right. We, of course, in a place like Australia, get a view of the broader supply issues that we do, and that sort of broadly those statistics you've quoted are correct, but that's not true worldwide, and a huge proportion of the farmers around the world are actually women, of course, working hard, singularly. On their places. So
their place, and they would probably have a system that is closer to yours than. I'm assuming some woman in India doesn't have access to aero crop spraying, you know.
Yes, that's right, and and even powered things. Yes, so there's a lot of manual labour and all of that, and absolutely. And I think it's examining all these things from a balance point of view rather than if you like, the extremes. Everything exists and we have various needs around the world or desires, and they're going to be served by the marketplace one way or another. But the trouble with our broad-scale simplification around the globe for all of us is that we're finally starting to front up to the consequences of that. And on the global scale, that's bloody obvious from a few weeks ago at 40 degrees above average in the Antarctic, and the same week the Arctic was 30 degrees above average in places. Well, you know, if that sort of thing isn't a clear warning for us all, then we're really not opening our eyes. But every practice, we're all intertwined. Just because I'm a food producer doesn't make me any different or better than somebody that's consuming somewhere else of that. But a lot of our Australian farming systems are actually to support livestock. So take the eastern states grain market. By and large, it's a grain market that exists to feed livestock.
Mm.
Yeah, and but that's not true of Western Australia. That's more high end value, and it goes overseas. And so there's different parts to this whole continent feeding things. I've just been to the Northern Territory, and if you go up there, they're only a skip over the water to Indonesia. So the cattle trade that goes to that's where the neighbours are. They're not. The neighbours aren't the southern capitals for those guys. That's where that economy is linked, even though it's international in nature.
Yes.
It's only geographically close. So
Yeah. It's like, in a way, less international than shipping something from Perth to Sydney.
Absolutely, yep.
Well, what about this? What will be the environmental impacts if people continue doing monocrop farming, for instance? That's the stuff you're railing against, right?
I guess, pointing out the consequences of that, because everything has a consequence. The systems I run have a consequence as well.
Yeah, but a good consequence, right?
Well, yes, but not if you judge it in if you narrow it down to total tons of grain.
Not from Monsanto's perspective, but yes,
No, that's right, and all of the people associated in that chain. So from their perspective,
their ecosystem.
Yeah, that's right, exactly, and it's
Right.
and it's true, and it exists, and
And we have to respect that.
Yeah. Well, it's part of it. Yeah. And yes. So
But what happens if they continue doing what they're doing? What does Australia look like in, say, 50 years?
The track we are going on will inevitably mean that we will have to have more and more external inputs into farms in general, because we are declining the generalised fertility of those ecosystems.
And does that come down to soil? Is that the thing that's really getting degraded, or what? When you say the degradation of the ecosystems, are you talking about it's very important that, I suppose it's all of it, isn't it? So the pollinating insects are going down, the soil quality is going down, I guess the quality of water is going down.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so to continue it going, you would have to do the land equivalent of using Ajax on your kitchen all the time,
Yes, I think you're getting the picture now that it is all interconnected. It's not just the soil, it's not just the trees, it's not just the grass, it's not just the animals that are on top of it. They're all part of it. The whole thing doesn't function unless we have, as near as we can, the whole thing.
So you're taking one for the team for your neighbours, because your excess output of bugs and caterpillars are going onto their land when they are then getting sprayed. So they're not thankful for your output.
No,
but
that's right. That can be a consequence. You've absolutely identified there. It can be seen as, wow, what a harbour for pests, because you are allowing all of this stuff to grow and be there unmolested. Meanwhile, they're trying hard to get rid of every bit of it. Yeah.
But am I right in thinking that just the fact that you're practicing your farming agriculture like that is having positive effects on your neighbours' lands that aren't?
I would suggest that in the broad, the science supports that, because that goes to everything, whether it be air flows, water flows, general diversity, that is never counted. So, there's no economic measure for the owls that might be roosting on our place that might be, going and preying on neighbourhood mice that they're going out and working on the edges.
Yes.
And it's not likely to get valued, and you think about GDP.
Probably not.
No, that's
maybe.
Right. GDP is a classic, isn't it? A tree has no value until you cut it down in GDP. Make it into matchsticks. chop
Yeah,
it up
now
into
that's
wood
value.
chips, then it's got a value sitting there. But
Still
of
not
course,
much, but
it
some.
does have a value. When you're there on a hot day or see the animals sheltering in the shade of it on a hot day, well, it obviously has value, but we're just not accounting for that, and so is our bigger, broader society problem of trying to get to grips with counting the cost of carbon and other things like that, because there haven't been those externalisations, fancy word of course, but that's what's happening with our farming systems, are externalising a lot of stuff that they used to be, if you like, islands to themselves. But now the effects of those farming systems are going way beyond their boundaries, whether it be, in the diesel we use, which has a consequence of that, and you run systems that are either at the present time high diesel use or low diesel use, and there are choices in that.
Yes. Yes. Just as a side note, there's nothing that makes me sadder, which does show how sheltered I am, because I've obviously never visited an abattoir. But when you see the cows that are going to visit the abattoir and they are all under one tree in a paddock that is just completely empty, I hate that sight, because you can see that about 3/4 of the cows really want to be in the shade. But they're obviously lower in the monkey hierarchy system, so they're just on the outskirts getting burnt.
Absolutely,
tanning
yes.
their leather,
You've picked it in one. The less dominant will end up on the outside. Bad luck. Yes,
That sucks.
And can I give you a perspective that Australia is still, to a bit of a degree, because of our age as a nation, still has a pioneering ethic.
Yeah.
And not quite so much a replenishment ethic that if you were interviewing, say, a group of European farmers that might be involved in long-term forestry growing as well as their farming activities and everything.
Right?
It's a different mindset, isn't it? At the moment, there's still lots and lots of pioneering going, and it helps make a bigger, hairier chest of you down at the pub, as you can quite well. I've opened up, or I've cleared, or I've sown for the first time these new areas. That's actually something that people take great pride in, right? So we're still in that cultural.
And I suppose in Europe you don't have the room to do that.
No, because that's long ago ended.
Yes.
Because, however many hundreds of years ago,
cleared.
so
Yeah.
they have been, it's nothing for them to be entering into necessarily tree planting schemes that might take a couple of hundred years to bear fruition. They would not blink at that. Whereas the mere mention of that sort of thing to an Australian farming audience causes them to recoil in horror, because I've actually done it on our place. In 2007, we planted 4% of our place for tree plantings for carbon credits at that time. So that was a little bit in the early stages of this whole thing. But the agreement was for 150 years. And when I tell that to farmers at field days and everything, the blood drains generally. And I say, well, it's no worries. So what have we got now? Only 135 years to go. So it's fine.
I'm guessing they don't see the perspective in that either, though, do they? And they're not like I'm imagining the vast majority of farmers that you speak to have no interest in what you have to say. Am I right?
That's correct. Yes, and from my perspective, understandably.
How are you so happy with just being like, you do realise you're destroying the planet, right? And they're just like, shut up. And you're like, okay, have a nice day. That's your life.
Yeah, well, that's right. Yes, but I think I take the attitude that we need to be creative with systems that give people what they need off the place, but still bring complexity to the biology.
You're a living example of it, aren't you?
Yes, that's right, but it can't ever be a singular thing. It could be, it could make up Bruce the guru, or the shining light, but that doesn't really ever convince most folks. They've got to live it themselves, and it's got to be about them, not me. And that's the more broad part that you start from. And so,
in the time that you've been doing it, though, have more farmers gotten receptive to what you're doing, or no?
Yes, there's a great wave at the moment under the term of regenerative farming, But the trouble with any term, of course, it's like saying, ethical real estate agents or something. There's plenty of them out there, but there's plenty that are not as well. So therefore, regenerative farmers, yes, okay, are happy that you identify as such, but are you really that or not? It's the practices and what you bring to that prove it.
Well, give me a figure. How many would you say are regenerative farmers in Australia? What percentage are we looking at? Wow. Is it less than 1?
Yeah, and look, I think it's a small but growing. So there's the hopeful bit. Yes, that's right. But in the same way, society in general, let's be brutally honest to us as Australians. On our watch right now, the Great Barrier Reef is suffering, its 6th major bleaching event, and we all collectively are watching this thing happen. Yes, that's right. And we, as a general thing, we haven't hugely shifted course yet. We're doing some polishing on the rough edges, but we're still a long way from making major enough changes to change the trend.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, and this is going to get a lot of hate in the comments, and that's mostly why I do it, because comments generate views, but
200 people watching.
Unbelievable. What are they saying?
I can't log in.
Right, okay, well.
We
don't even pay attention anyway.
That's right, yes. We can only say thank you for your comments.
Well, you can. I'm going to be ruder to them. Why are you watching? That's pretty amazing. Look, you're holding their attention then, that, Bruce? Because they don't have to be watching this. There's a lot of chicks pretending to be anime characters on Twitch. Okay. What is your view on Alan Savory? What do you think? Is he a saviour?
So Alan Savory's work is one of a foundational piece and part of what we have done. So if we were to summarise that to an audience that didn't know, he identified that livestock impacts across the landscape can be both sides of the coin. Largely, our history as humans for the 15 or so thousand years with our domesticated livestock has been to degrade landscapes. That tool can be used to enhance and expand diversity.
That's what I thought, and I think the reason that it does it, because I get this, I remember doing something on it, and then you get all these people that watch Cowspiracy, which has just been debunked numerous times over that documentary, but you get those people that their entire education is watching a Netflix documentary, and they come out and then they say that Alan Savory is a fraud because this place said it. But I have had numerous farmers contact me over the years saying, like, I'll send you photos. This is what my paddocks looked like 15 years ago. This is what they look like now. And that paddock photo was taken in a good year. And this paddock photo 15 years later is taken during drought. And look at my neighbour's paddocks during drought.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. I think that's a little more important than a peer-reviewed report, kiddies, that you never read in the first place. Like, that photo says everything.
Yes, and I think a couple of points that come to my mind is not everything that Savory said or did has stood the test of time, but that's the same as Einstein or Newton or and so it's evolving. But an analogy I can bring that might make sense to folks is to think about a chainsaw in a forest. So that chainsaw can destroy the whole forest, or it can actually act at a certain rate and scale to actually enhance and actually make that forest more diverse than if we didn't have that tool there at all. That's really quite a fundamental thing. So, is a chainsaw evil? Well, it depends how you use it. Is a cow evil? Well, it depends how you use it. Absolutely. So everything...
Especially in a country like Australia, I'm imagining that because we just never had those animals that are hooved that can bring up the soil, if you wanted to increase the quality of the soil quickly, You could do it with a number of Macca's cows that are here at the moment. You know?
Yes, well, what they are for us is just a tool. If we we divorce ourselves from our love of the animals, which is what the people that grow the animals do actually have that, even though they consume them, and that might be a surprise for some folks, but they have genuinely a deep and abiding love, overwhelmingly. But they're actually our modern megafauna. So.
Yes.
We're lacking those tools. If we could go back in the time tunnel and go back to roughly 47,000 years ago and say, oh, gee, just save the last of those diprotodons and stuff for us, please. We'll that would be really great, because we'd have had the whole, think about that diprotodon. It wasn't just an animal in the landscape. It had the whole assemblage of animals that relied on it and worked in functions. So there were, things like dung beetles burying its stuff into the ground, and other insects that preyed on it, and diseases and pathogens and the whole thing. So we can only operate with the tools that we have. So they're our modern megafauna, and it's our responsibility to use them across the landscape for good or not. And so if it's only just about profit, well then, human nature will dictate, of course, that they're going to be used in a way that doesn't care about the landscape. And it's, sometimes too mixed up with, often said in Australia, oh, well, we didn't have hard-hoofed animals. Yep, absolutely. But that's what we've got now. And the single mammal that did the worst degradation across our whole landscape, introduced, had soft feet. It was the rabbit. If you go back to those times and see the absolute carnage across the landscape and incredible, unstoppable erosion, because before the advent of myxomatosis as a disease to control rabbits, effectively they weren't able to be controlled. So therefore everything was eaten, and plants are what holds the soil. Right, so hard-hoofed animals definitely can cause compaction and that sort of thing, but that's all about how they're distributed across the landscape, isn't it? And so that's another part of what I do most of my time nowadays, actually going out into the station country across Australia, into the big acreages, and doing animal behaviour work with our self-herding field of work. So you get the animals to choose to go to the places you signal, and therefore you are changing their impact across the whole land. If we don't take an active role in that, they are creatures of habit just like us, so therefore they over-impact parts where they're comfortable and under-impact others, so therefore you've got degradation happening at both ends of the scale. By actively having animal behavioural tricks and science, we can take them around the landscape, and what's fun about it, we don't need to go and put up fences all over everywhere and consume more external inputs to get that level of distribution. We get them to choose to redistribute themselves rather than us forcing them into smaller and smaller parts, which is, the only tools that Savoury had when he came up with his stuff was that, or active herding.
Well, is it right to assume then that if you put in that extra effort when you started, you are doing less now?
Oh,
so you're doing less work than your farmer neighbours?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, that's where I got the name of the tag of being called the lazy farmer. And I try to live up to that. It's an aim that should be an aim for everybody's life, really.
Shouldn't it? Why would you take pride in, if we're just talking about economic scale, just being like, I spend my entire life trying to get it up to this standard. So have you seen a movie in the last 20 years? No. That's not something to be proud of. Your life is holistic now. You're not just a farmer. Like, you can rock up down to Sydney and just talk to people about peaches that you like here, I don't think they have that luxury. Because you always hear this about farmers, that they just get up at 6 a.m. and then they go to bed at 12,
Yeah, oh yes, there's a lot of hard work, and of course a lot of that's actually driven by human love, for want of a better word. It's a desire and an enjoyment in the general work, even the downs as well as the ups, because that give some satisfaction.
But actually, in a way, if your land is more manageable, then surely you could just buy more land and work on that and make that more manageable. And in the long run, you actually probably would be more profitable because you just have to put less work into it.
Absolutely, yeah. So once again, that's a scale
Make
thing.
Beatles your employees.
Yeah, that's right. Well, most of them are dead now, aren't they?
Yes.
We've
Well,
only got-
actually, just so everybody knows, as a quick plug, the reason that I've got so obsessed with pesticides at the moment is because of this man. He freaked me out about it. I didn't know anything. So if you want to know about that, we'll go into the other. I've done a lot of videos on that at this point. But sorry, continue. Yes. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Yes. Yeah, so we've it's a good way of putting it to think about the whole diversity can actually replenish and give you the inputs that otherwise you've got to buy from outside. So whenever you eliminate anything, well, in the long run, be prepared to do its job in a natural sense. So that's why simplification of agriculture in the long run will always need lots more energy of one type or another, inputs of one type or another, because we are not letting nature actually provide the basis for food production because we're eliminating so many of those cycles and possibilities.
You know what it reminds me of? There's this episode of Angry Beavers, and I'm sure you don't know what that is, and I'm sure the people watching this don't know what it is because Miss Love and I sit in this weird purgatory never zone of not being Gen Z and not being baby boomers. And so we have all of these references that maybe 10% of the audience know. But there's this episode of, it's this old cartoon, and I remember it so vividly, of one of the brothers just getting all of these crappy little toys in his cereal box, and then the other one just cutting out all the tokens for the cereal box and then sending them and then coming back with way better toys. And it sounds like that's what you figured out. It sounds like, okay, you can be more economically productive if you clear all of the land in the short term. In the long term, you're going to be more economically productive.
Yes, it's providing a bigger base. And so could I refer again to scale here, if which is where agriculture is done, getting aside from the how you produce stuff for a moment, but the bigger farmers are buying the little farmers out. This is a continuing trend everywhere. Well, where does that leave community in the end, in those local areas? It leaves it collapsed in the end. Yeah, there's nothing left. There isn't the school bus run anymore. There isn't the footy team. All of those sort of things that happen. And so there's places I know of in WA where a great example. I won't pinpoint where it is, but a valley that 15 years ago had 10 families in it and now has 2. And so essentially those families are eyeing, those 2 remaining are eyeing one and off. So is it going to be me or is it going to be you? But yet they will still talk about, oh dear, it's sad that we don't have a bus run, or we're losing nurses from the local hospital, or all of those things that come as a consequence. If you depopulate areas, well then of course you can't keep community. So it's a zero-sum game in the end.
Yes, it is.
And that expansive scale is making up actually for a deep level of unprofitability. Because if you think about anything, if there's any industry that doesn't have lots of new participants coming in, well, it's showing a lack of profitability. Inherently. And
I'm going to say it's really interesting, but I'm hungry and I've got an Italian restaurant you should check out. I know Miss Love's excited about that.
Wonderful.
But Bruce, thanks so much. And is there anything that you'd like to shout out?
Oh, I guess we've mentioned a lot of things here today. I'd like to say thank you, genuinely thank you to you and the team of broadening out the range of things that you bring to people's attention, which is really something. We're all in this together.
But products you want to plug.
I think if people are, and that's lovely of you. I'd rather demur and say that if people really want to find out the Google or DuckDuckGo, you can find out a lot. One of the things I'm most proud of is selfherding.com. and that's a broad new whole field of enterprise, and that's the animal behaviour stuff, and that more than anything will change the consequences for our whole continent.
Yeah, and I hope you do check it out, because there is surprisingly more farmers that pay attention to this than I originally thought. They must not know about ABC's landline, but but they do, and so I hope that you check that out then. If your parents have property, for instance, so do that. And thanks a lot, Bruce.